Are there any questions towards the speakers for after the break?
And maybe just to put on some more light, if that's possible.
But I changed your presentation, right?
And is it because you were tired, or is it because it was not interesting enough?
Okay.
No. Okay, well, perhaps it will come just in the time as well, because you all who you brought in your vision before we started the conference on participation.
No? Can you raise your hands? Who was stating the vision? You know, there was the question, what is your vision of heritage participation, in the Google forms that you were making in order to apply? Who did that homework? Just to see, because
then it's all the people at home, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good, because it's interesting, because we received quite some visions. And you have made an analysis, Visna. What did you find?
So yeah, we were discussing yesterday how best to present this diversity of visions. But then we saw, okay, there are certain topics, and we grouped them in 4 topics, so that we can at least a bit structure the dialogue this time. So the first group is, do you hear well, or yeah? So maybe Astrid, you...
Oh, then I will switch.
Yeah, perfect. So the first group of vision is related to like the social aspect of participation. The fact that different organizations and institutions and groups have to unite their forces. So many of you thought not only of top-down or bottom-up participation, but exactly the thing that Susie suggested, of a continuum of cooperation in some sort of way. So there was this, that the activists and specialists have to join their forces, that we need to learn about differences as well as commonalities of participation in various heritage domain, and this is a really interesting point for discussion. So what is the difference between participation in different fields of heritage? We heard now the digitization tool in the urban planning, what this can do, but then public archaeology is something that seems totally different. So what are the different tools that we could share? Then there is the vision that heritage is actively discussed in different media, social media, activist groups, schools are also part of it. So it has gained the appreciation as a vital part of social capital. So it's embedded in the society and in the social relations. And of course, there's this tagline, you can't manage or protect heritage on your own. But let's see what we have further. Then there's a whole group going back to from different social needs and cooperations. That is related to the spirit of place and heritage being embedded in the placemaking, in the local communities, and in the ways how we protect and kind of manage the environment. So it's about discovering the genius loci, the spirit of place through local research. Many have suggested that it is actually the mix of tangible, intangible, natural heritage and so on that are creating this space, and that actually having communities participating in collecting different stories and memories is the way to go. Then we have the whole aspect, of course, not surprisingly, that is related to digitalization. And there's many hopes put there so that digital tools can support and increase participation and have it on much larger scale. That digitalization is something that almost by rule will invite many more people and groups to participate in heritage making. And there's of course a lot of kind of writing and a lot of projects that are really building heritage communities across the world. So it doesn't matter where you are. If you are interested in a certain topic, you can join a Facebook group or join a website and so on and be a part of protection. But then also what is interesting, there's one of the visions is saying that participation, communication and feedback using common open digital GIS base will help us creating and maintaining changing living and interesting cultural environments. And this goes back to the previous kind of group of topics related to how we preserve best and how we research the local environment. So digital tools could help in that regard as well.
Do you have a personal opinion about how this digitization, when you participate in it, how to value contributions via the social media?
So I think there's few perspectives on this. I think first, digitalization and technology as such is not a way to participation, and not a way to kind of more open participation per se. So you have to be really careful how you are communicating, tagging the groups, how you enable kind of different steps and guidelines for people to participate, because we have these kind of digital participation data that are saying 90% of people are just clicking and liking and so on, or just reading the comments. 9% are sharing and only 1% is actually contributing. So that's really when we think about participation in digital world, there's a lot of limits in that, and I hope we will change that by, again, having different professionals and different groups kind of enabling or encouraging citizens to be more active there. I think that's one thing, and the other perspective is that digital social media has become has been creating different social bubbles. So you and your friends and the likes are living within one bubble, and from that perspective, every news feed you get in the Facebook, all the information and so on is very well governed by your tastes, worldviews, interests, and so on. So what I'm afraid of as well is where do different groups meet? And I think cities are really good places, local environments are really good places for different backgrounds, different classes to actually meet. Digital space is limiting that sometimes.
I was wondering if somebody in the audience has experiences with it. How do you break up, let's say, this participation, this 1% and coming out of this bubble? Because as it's mentioned quite often, I think it's quite an interesting subject. No? Okay, well that might be, oh, you? Yeah, okay, good, Susie. Otherwise I would say it's a nice subject for research.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't really have that kind of example, but or experience of trying to break that bubble, but I just wanted to point out it's also, as well as people forming their own social media bubbles, an exclusionary thing too, and there are people who don't participate in digitized practices for different reasons, whether it's economic or to do with confidence online, and so it's not, in a way, it's also not something that is maybe as inclusive as proponents like to say sometimes.
Yeah. It's a mean. So yeah. Okay. Good. Sorry, Fisna, but because you are not ready yet, but for the interview.
No, but that was really interesting question, and I think if we talk about intergenerational dialogue, that is hardly happening in the digital space as well. So that's one of the most obvious kind of examples of what Susie was mentioning. And of course, there's this idea that participation should lead to decolonialization of heritage and heritage planning, meaning that we have to restructure the current power structures, who decides what is heritage, how heritage gets enlisted, how it gets interpreted, what stories are being told, and who has the right to be a part of that discussion. So there's quite some of the visions that were going in that direction, actually pinpoint to different groups that are not part of the discussion and that should be, or to some of the kind of hidden histories that are hidden within the private spaces or the different groups that should be made public and more inclusive.
This decolonization, I was a bit puzzled because in the Dutch context, then we always refer and think of the period that the Netherlands colonized, well, a huge part of the world, and it's a subject of discussion in the Netherlands, which is quite topical. But this is another context.
Has been taken from the practice of colonialization that has been going on at some point in time. But then what the theoreticians are currently kind of exploring is that decolonialization wasn't just the matter of geography. It was also the matter of who had the power to kind of formulate the world order. So by colonizing different countries, you were also imposing different public authorities, regimes, education, and so on. So a lot of ideas today are actually Western-made ideas, and that don't include much of the rest of the world, and then the local communities as well. So I guess that's the idea here, but I wasn't the right one writing this, so it would be really good to know who wrote it, and can you maybe clarify what you mean?
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if you're going to answer the question Wisna is asking, but...
I'm not sure whether I'm going to answer your question, but it did make me think of one of the processes we've been involved with Entopia in the west of Ireland, in a relatively small town. And our job has not been to tell people in the town what to do, but rather to try and persuade them to get on with what they want to do and give them a process with which to do it. Well, during that time, we had to very rapidly learn a bit about the place so that we wouldn't be completely ignorant. And it had a fascinating, still has of course, historical background, so that we could see why there was such an interest in making this place be unique. But something that we came upon, we didn't know before we went, was the reality that within that town there were something like 2,000 population of Brazilians in the west of Ireland. And we would not have understood that except for it to be explained that there was a meat processing factory was opened 20 years ago. It was occupied very largely by specialist meat processing people from Brazil, and then it closed down about 10 years ago. And there was this awful time when some of the Brazilians were leaving to go home and others were finding new jobs and new work. So when you come to this town now, you would find that there are Brazilian shops there, there are Brazilian restaurants, and there's a whole identity about the town. And it did need somebody from outside to say, this is one of the most vital heritage components that you have in the place. And I think that's, in a way, it's representing you as well, because the town was built by colonists from a place called England in the 18th century. And it's absolutely beautifully done. But that seems to be the end of the story, if you like, when the current story of the town is absolutely fascinating. And I think we're going to help for that to be stitched into it.
Good, thank you. More to say about your analysis? And
yeah, maybe, but maybe even more to ask. So there's one more saying. So heritage should become integral part of everyday thinking, awareness, and actions of citizens, not just the place they visit, experience, and appreciate occasionally. So it's also the question, if we want heritage participation to be happening, how we enable this historical awareness, how we embed heritage education in all schools, how we actually change people's opinions about history and heritage. So that's, yeah, one of it. And then we have quite a few of those who are maybe not the visions, but are really kind of the different statements pinpointing think to kind of that participation should be essential part of sustainable development, that we should use participation even in fighting illegal trafficking and kind of
that I think is a quite difficult one. I was involved in fighting illicit trade for some time, but bottom-up participation in fighting illegal trafficking. I thought, okay, how might it look like?
The same I had in mind. So if there's someone actually who wrote this, what did you think? And then I think Susie is also one of the persons to maybe answer this, because you have been dealing, well, not maybe with illicit trafficking, but with the illegal diggers in archaeological sites. Yeah.
I might have written it too, I can't remember. It looks familiar. Yeah, I actually worked on a research project in Glasgow on illicit trafficking, so I was looking at the networks and the transnational trade. I think there is a place in bottom-up fighting of this cause, and obviously it's a complex issue and it's a lot to do with policy and education, both of which have limited success so far. But I think there's awareness raising of the market side of the citizens who buy cultural material that maybe don't think about provenance, and that's somewhere where we can help. And also in so-called source nations, if there's alternative means of income, if people are in a position that they're more heritage savvy and less easily exploited by dealers and others. So it's a long and complex process, but I think it is something that activism has a place in. And colleagues of mine still researching this have talked about ideas borrowed from other areas of criminology where you make things socially unacceptable. And that's something we could think about.
So it's a bit naming and shaming. That's right, yeah, okay, good. Yeah.
This interesting project that was awarded by Europa Nostra just crossed my mind, called SOS Azuleos. It's a project from Lisbon, but then it's now going on in the whole of Portugal, and they are now kind of taking it to Brazil as well. It's the Museum of the Police, and then they were doing the projects together with the customs and the police office and the universities and schools, talking about these antiquity tiles that are the essential part of architecture in Lisbon and much of the Portugal, but that have been object of illicit trafficking for many years. So the first thing they were doing is educating citizens that this is something that is really valuable and important, because as Philip was saying, for locals, it's something that is so obvious and it's all around that it's maybe not of value. So I guess one first step is to actually make citizens aware of appreciating what is in their basic everyday surrounding.
Reactions or comments on what on the analysis of Visna? Then I was just thinking, if you don't mind, Lena, you posed a question. Have you had an answer by somebody during the presentation, or would you like to have an answer and then repeat perhaps your question and see if we can answer it? Because it was not clear to me anymore. I didn't remind it, but I wrote down question, and I thought you didn't receive any answer yet.
Yes, the question I asked about the UNESCO heritage, and if Finland is and the Ministry of Culture and Education will someday pass on a proposal. My question was that should the process reflect our society? Should there be participation? Not, I don't think voting any kind, but is that possible? I don't know. I don't know who is the right person to answer that, but I really think it's important.
Can somebody help Lena with answering the question? Any experience or ideas how to speed up or to connect participation in UNESCO processes, let's say? Yeah.
May I just ask Lena that did you have any specific kind of project on your mind?
Well, this is only an idea, I know, but I know that some people are already working for it, that if we might have 15 Aalto sites from Finland and other countries one day creating a proposal for the UNESCO decision making. So who is in charge of answering this question, that which are the 15 buildings or 12 or 20 who are worth participating in this kind of question? I think we are, or we would be able to organize this kind of process here in Finland, and it would also reflect our society, how we work here, that people are participating in choosing which is it some building or two from Jyväskylä, Alajärvi, Rovaniemi, New York, from Sweden, from Venice? Who decides?
Well, perhaps we can ask some of our... okay, you can have it.
Well, I could, yes, kind of continue, because I do understand that it's not really the only the case for Alvar Aalto Foundation or the Ministry of Education and Culture to decide which ones are the best example ones. Yes, that's from down to top, yes, and that's what we have to figure out, that which and how people can somehow influence for that matter. But surely the Aalto Foundation and the Ministry of Education are not enough.
I can tell something about the process in the Netherlands. For 15 years we had a so-called tentative list, and on that tentative list were buildings of the modern era and structures from the heritage of our rich water history. So that were the two lines from which they worked, and which they decided to have Amsterdam listed and the Rietveld Schreuderhuis as a modernist building. I guess that will be the same strategic in all the countries, that they make a list of different parts or different subjects. The last time there was a cooperation in the sense that organizations were invited to also give their opinion on what they thought would be UNESCO worth. And then experts were reflecting that, and then they gave an answer. And in that research process, they discovered that there were some sites really interesting, but that the protection was not that good, or that there were annexes which were not making it quite unique enough. So that was what happened. So I think for Finland it might be interesting to focus on who is doing the listing, and then organizing your own creativity with citizens and with experts to just propose buildings and sites for protection.
So we can make use of Esko Mati's his techniques to do it. Sorry?
And there might be one other interesting thing, that's the immaterial heritage. And with the immaterial heritage, there's also a different system of valuation, because the groups who are having a tradition, they need to organize themselves, and there's a management plan which they have to, implement themselves. So there's a lot of focus on the groups that they can in the future maintain their traditions. So that's also bottom up and top down with experts.
That was where I was where I was referring to this convention for intangible heritage. I'm involved as an advisor of the Art Council in the Netherlands and involved in the Committee of Intangible Heritage. And so we decide every now and then on what might become on the Dutch list and what might be proposed towards the international one. And there I can really tell you that we are very keen and on that this community that support the intangible heritage subject in this way, that is very important. And it's not only in one individual erecting a foundation, because that is really not enough. So it really should be a sustainable community, even when it is not a very, very big one, like now when it comes to the, what is the English word? Falconeers. It's the bird way, the birds where you can fight and falcons, yeah, exactly. That is now, it's already on the intangible list. The Dutch are proposed to become part of it as well. And it's a very small community, from 200 persons in the Netherlands, but it's a very sustainable one. Despite I'm not discussing the subject, because that's another matter, but it is a sustainable community supporting this falcon way of living, let's say. Visna, sorry.
A few other perspectives when it comes to UNESCO. So UNESCO has been working very much on involving or promoting citizens' participation even in the World Heritage List. So not just the intangible, but also the hardcore World Heritage List. So there's a committee of different civil society organizations that is now being chaired by UNESCO. All the civil society organizations that are working on enlisted or near the enlisted World Heritage sites. So that's one community going on, and this has been promoted quite a lot. And on the other hand, I think the new operational guidelines from 2005 that foresee the management plans for each and every site that has been inscribed on the list, that's a really useful tool to actually make space for citizen participation and participation of different groups. And that's been something that we have been using in Serbia to kind of push the authorities forward in saying, okay, this is something that UNESCO has been prescribing, and within the very management plan and all the literature connected to it, the involvement of broad range of interest groups and community is one of the high priorities of the management plan. So that is a good mechanism. And then I think the third one, called the Historic Urban Landscapes Approach, there's UNESCO's recommendation on that from 2012. And the whole recommendation is supposed to balance the preservation of the historic towns and the development by involving a lot of different community groups and a lot of different interest stakeholders. So this has been something that is also going on, and there's many education going on around, pushed by UNESCO.
Is helpful?
Yes, thank you. And I know that there are specialists also in Finland who work for this kind of issues, but it was very important when you said that no one can protect things by themselves. You need cooperation. So if people often think that planners are working alone and they have their own ideas, and you as citizens, you cannot say anything to planners. So now I am a planner telling the heritage specialists that please be more open and discuss with us, and really this top-down process, because, okay, process is 50% and the result is 50%.
Okay, well, we have heard the invitation, and actually this bottom-up and top-down, I thought it was very good to I've learned now, because of Susie, you said that this collaboration continuum. I think that's, from my personal perspective, that's more helpful than top-down and bottom-up, because there is this, this interchange, and sometimes you need both, and you need a top-down to have this grassroots, and well, it's quite a complex thing, but this continuum that helps a bit, gives a bit of comfort, at least to me. Yeah.
Very good thing to say, okay, heritage professionals do be more open, because in much of the kind of writing about participation and in much of the talk, there's a sort of antagonistic relationship between the professionals on one hand and the authorities, the top-down approach, and the communities. And communities are always perceived as good per se, and heritage professionals are perceived as the bad guys because they are closed, they're not opened, they are working according to this authoritative manner. So I think it's, in order for that not to happen, it's really important to have different points of conversation and also rethink heritage profession, right? In order to make it more open and more accessible for different groups to collaborate, actually. We shouldn't have just a bottom-up, yeah.
No, I think so as well. There was actually one question I wanted to ask as well to our judge. However, unfortunately, he's not in the room anymore. But because I was wondering how to make these kind of decisions about values. He was a bit vague here and there when it came to this harbor. And I was wondering if somebody has some experiences in judging and valuation. When do you value one is better than the other? And you're also involved in participation and heritage. And we discussed these different opinions and this to respect different opinions, also when it comes to this Gainer's loggy from an area, but there might be different layers. So which one do we preserve? How do we, do you have some experience with it? Because it puzzles me as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Matti Hakamäki from Kaustinen, small town village in central Ostrobotnian region, and this is very good question. I don't know if you have the answer exactly to this one, but I've been thinking now after these discussions and these presentations about the role of especially this how the who has the power and like in a community. For example, in Kaustinen, it's a very small, only 4,000 inhabitants, and it's very rich in folk music culture, and it has been for many centuries. But anyways, there are lots of people or some people who don't think that it's like their own culture. And I was thinking about this top-down and bottom-up ideology that maybe it would be useful for this to have this kind of more conversation, like not only from bottom-up, but also like in Kaustinen society or the community would, I think, need some outsiders' point of view, like what there can be done, because I think there is like very many issues, at least in Kaustinen, but I think it will be in like worldwide in very many other places also the same situation, that you don't see from your own heritage site how the community actually reacts to this heritage and what are actually the problems. And from that thinking, I was just maybe a little question that has there been in other countries, other places, like examples from maybe a person like an expert coming to a smaller community to tell that, okay, or to kind of listen what are your problems and what might be the answers to get past them and maybe have the potential, like the whole potential, because I'm sure that like from my point of view, I work with the Folk Music Institute, so I kind of like represent the folk music scene in Finland, and I know that there are in many places there is very active, very good communities with very good heritage, but the potential is used only like a small percentage. And I think these issues that we are just now talking about are the ones that should be solved in a way to get the full potential. And okay, sorry, not being very precise here, but just making my own ideas also at the same time. But I think this would be one very, very important thing to think also for the bigger organizations like Europa, Nostra, or UNESCO, or these kind of organizations, So how they could be in help with the local communities.
Actually, when I would rephrase it, I would think, okay, how can we break up the tunnel vision for a small community that does not value perhaps its own heritage as valuable? So you were asking for kind of a, I want to say peer review, but some others are, I want to say happier, but it's easier perhaps to tell how valuable the cultural heritage is for a small community. But because you said, well, I'm talking out loud, and you're making up your mind, and I thought, okay, perhaps how I interpret what you said is that I thought, okay, you're from a smaller community and with a lot of music, but the participants does not value it on its value that it really is. And perhaps when somebody from outside their community comes and tells them it is very important and it's unique, that gives them a lot of power to be more proud even on the cultural heritage than they are. So a kind of a peer review. Others are coming to the village to tell how important the cultural heritage is.
Yes, and exactly that, and also I think it's very hard to, or very important to kind of investigate where are the borders of your community, what is like, what's it's made of, and all these things that we have now been talking about. Can it be opposed to another right in a way? This right for cultural heritage, and I think this kind of issues, they're not very easily seen from inside, always.
Looking at all of you in this part of the room, noticing that all the discussion is going on there, and for sure there are many kind of experiences that you can also share in this regard. So either it is how you can value and kind of foster awareness of heritage in smaller communities, or digitalization processes and how you foster participation there, or how you balance different values and different interpretations. But it would be really great to hear some of you in that regard. Any experiences you can share? Yeah, you were looking as you have something.
I was actually thinking about fostering children to take part in cultural heritage. I was really happy to note that we have a new study plan for the schools in Finland. And my children had a year back or so a voluntary course at school, which was time travel in Leppävaara, which is the little part of Espoo I live in. So they could actually choose a course at school where they got acquainted with the neighborhood. They went to see some of the old houses, and they did drawings about what the place would look like in 100 years. And I think that's a really good way to engage children. And I was as I work with cultural heritage myself, I was really happy to see that at least some schools do take this seriously. It is in the new study plan that children should learn about their communities and their cultural heritage and about the history of the local places, but I don't know how much it's done in all the schools. This was a voluntary course, but both my kids decided without me telling them to take the course. And I think it's really good to have children when they are small to learn about their own local history and heritage.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I realize we haven't been talking so much about involvement of children, and we have someone in the room here who I think can answer on some of the questions, because she's been dealing with education, with heritage education for children. So what's the situation in Finland? How many schools do have this kind of courses?
Okay, hey, nice. Thank you, Vishna. My name is Hanna Lämsä. I'm representing the Europa Nostra board as a member, and also cultural heritage education in Finland. It was great being here. I enjoyed all the speeches today. So Vishnu, what were you asking actually? That how much there is?
Well, I think if we take that example of a course that kids can choose and participate in local heritage, how are you fostering that many more of schools do have that kind of education? And what are you doing as the organization to kind of bring heritage closer to children?
Actually, can I start with the values? Because I had one comment on the value discussion, and this is linking to also the heritage education kind of point I would like to address. So I think the question of values is very difficult, but it's also important. And I was kind of referring to the sustainable development theme as well, because as cultural heritage people, activists, professionals, working on the field, I think we have to be able to pronounce what are the values of cultural heritage, so that kind of the other sectors and persons who are representing the other pillars of the sustainable development understand us. So I think dialogue in the sustainable development scheme is very important. But then I would also like to comment on Anna-Maija's. I kind of liked her idea of newcomers, as children as newcomers and immigrants as newcomers. So we have to take that like seriously, and actually we can't impose our values to the newcomers. We have to ask, what do they think about the cultural heritage? So this is basically what we are trying to do. We are trying to foster the identities of the newcomers to form their own values. And this kind of course is one way to do it, if you do it in a kind of a participatory way. So we are not teaching in a way. We cannot lecture about cultural heritage. We can open up possibilities. We can offer information. We can offer possibilities to participate. And this is kind of as we see the kind of the role of young people in heritage process. So kind of the participatory aspect has always being kind of in the core of the work we do. So, yeah, basically.
Thanks, and I think what you mentioned is really important, not just for education and participation of children, but really much broader when thinking about participation, not to lecture, but open up the space, create the space for converse and so on.
Yes, thank you. Jatta Salm again. So it was nice to hear it was described what happens in Espoo. Yes, it happens. It has been happening for about 10 years, I think. But it takes 20 years when they grow up and come as like public servants to understand that. So we have to, as like, do something for those public servants who actually, the word in English is very good because it is a servant in public service, and in Finland they are virkamies, which is another thing as like policeman almost, so or kind of a association. So public servant is a very good word, but they don't understand what is as described in Turku. So I think in Espoo we spend more. You said 80% tax money comes from as like inhabitants, not for companies. But in Espoo, I think now after Nokia gone, it's about 90% at the moment. But still, we don't see the progress. We don't see the progress. It comes from constructors mainly because of the metro. And the ideas come from constructors, and then the inhabitants are not important or even they don't ask. And then also what happens in Tapila Garden City is gone almost. So which should have been in UNESCO heritage.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at what time is it? So
yeah, I think we wrap up. How are you going home, Vishna, after today?
Well, I think it's ongoing, and we should keep up the discussion. I think there's a real assignment for us to go around and share this book. It's available in PDF as well, so you can share it online. And maybe even have a task to kind of organize small discussions around the book content in your own environments, in your own groups, in your own institutions, and so on, so that we can build on that. But I think it's for me, what I will take is that, well, first of all, participation is not good per se. It has to have much more elements. We shouldn't make like enemies and friends between the communities and professionals. Professionals are oftentimes members of communities with their own desires and interests, so we should make ways to collaborate. For professionals, all of us who deal with heritage, I think it's a big invitation to kind of reimagine our own work and our own profession so that we can embrace different values and different voices that exist there. So to keep this collaborative continuum really running, not to close it up. I think, and then I think it's interesting from time to time to invite the legal persons, the judges and so on, and to have really this discussion of what is possible between the very strict legal framework that asks for strict definitions and something that is a matter of humanities and cultural heritage that is much more broad and much more kind of fluffy and intangible oftentimes. So how to create these different conversations, and not only with legal persons, but why not with investors? All of these points of kind of meetings are also the opportunities for raising their awareness and getting something more from them. So let's keep all those conversations going.
I have nothing to add because I already said what I will bring home, and I haven't received answers on all my questions. But that's okay, because that keeps me thinking in the future as well. For me, it was a very valuable afternoon, and so thank you very much for your attention, and also at home, thank you very much. We will have a tram ride now and a nice dinner, but for these practical matters, I will give the floor to Tapani. What you want?
You were the chair.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, and especially Astrid and Vishna. Excellent discussion. Now the day is ending, and tram is soon waiting us. So, and takes time to put your clothes on and so on. But it was 6 o'clock sharp.
6 o'clock.
Yes, very sharp. Yes. Yes. Okay, thank you for all of you, and maybe we have managed to make how would I say, as ancestors, the future better for future generations, or whatever banal I should say. All right, thank you, everybody.